Hi everyone, my name is Brett Raymond. I chose to read Read Aside for my book tonight. I thought it was a really good book. It was easy to read, it had a lot of good, useful information in it. Um, Usually, the books that we get assigned aren't always the best to read. They're dry. This one wasn't at all. So, I thought it had a lot of great ideas that I'm going to talk about tonight. The book really hit home with me too because I feel like I suffered from read aside curriculum when I was growing up. Um, the books that we were given weren't always that great. I remember being a kid and not being able to read all that great. And instead of like somebody helping me, I really felt like that never really happened. It felt like it was reinforced that I was a bad reader and that it just was what it was. And then I kind of remember struggling with reading throughout elementary school. Then I started playing a lot of video games that actually were like text based across the screen, so I had to read them. And that's what really actually got me into being a better reader, surprisingly. So when the book talked about how we can't just discredit medium like movies and video games and things like that, that made a lot of sense to me too. Sometimes, because reading is reading, no matter what you're doing, it's beneficial. They did talk about how, like the internet, you aren't going as deep into things, which did make sense too, and that's why reading books is so helpful in that. With that too, being more comfortable reading by playing video games, then I felt more comfortable reading books because I didn't struggle as much. I wasn't stuttering or struggling with words. So started reading books like Harry Potter and Holes, and then that's when I really started to find my reading flow. And now I can sit down and read a good book. I can reread Harry Potter. I reread it every couple years, the series, and just get lost in it and read it in about 2-3 weeks. Can read the whole series, just sitting there losing time. Just like they talked about in the book, if you're in your reading flow, you can forget to where you're even at or how long you've been reading or what you're doing. So it's pretty nice being able to do that. I wish I had some more time to do that and need to make more time. And the book talked about reading being a problem for students right now. I teach 8th grade social studies, and I have a lot of struggling readers and kids that just don't want to read, don't like to read, don't find any reason to read what we're reading. And I try to get them, involved in it the best that I can. I probably can do better, basically, what I learned from reading this book. Like teaching them the reading strategies to help them get through things. I also take for granted that I have a lot of education in what I am teaching them. So it seems second nature to me, and these things that I don't even think about are things that they don't comprehend, which goes, as the book was talking about, their vocabularies or things. So, they read a word, they have no idea what it is, they don't understand the context clues behind it, they don't understand the time period or anything like that, and that is hard. I've taken a lot of Roman history classes, like the Roman Empire, and when you're reading some of those texts, they're talking about places that don't exist anymore, or the names are different now, so you got to try to figure out where that place is in the modern world, who these people are, and they're words that are hard to pronounce, so it can get really bogged down in there. So I understand where they're coming from in that point. I just have to understand more that they're not at the same level of background knowledge that I have, and that's why we need to work together to get them more background knowledge. One thing that I do in my directed studies is we have choice reading. We do it for at least 10 minutes every day. But last year I kind of got away with it. From it, I had directed study was kind of difficult, and if I could just get them to be quiet for a while so kids could work, then that felt like a win. Um, but I need to focus more on getting them to read the 10 minutes of their choice, not, well, Mr. Raymond, can I do this? I have to do this for homework. I have to do this. I have to do this. Just tell them that the 10 minutes, that's all we're going to do. You're going to get a book and you're going to read it. And I think that'll help improve that time, and they'll learn to love it too. We also we read a lot in class. A lot of it's academic though, so it's not with the 50-50 that the author talked about. But we do read a book called A Soldier's Heart. It's by Gary Paulson, and it's a really good book, and the kids like it. And what I've done with them is during the reading, we don't stop. I give them the book. They read, the 2 chapters. We read 2 chapters a day. There's 10 chapters. We try to read it in 1 week. So it's not overwhelming. The chapters are about 14, 15 pages long. It's a really short book. And some of the kids, it'll be the only book that they read the whole year, which is sad. But they read it in a group too, so they read out loud to each other. And that keeps everybody involved, so everybody is following along with the book too that way. And then I have them answer some questions that they get to use for notes when they take at the end. I have them answer a few questions about the book for assessment purposes. But during the lesson, during the classes, they just read, and then afterwards, before the next class, we'll talk about what happened in the chapter some, and we'll talk about some of the words that maybe didn't make sense or things like that. And I also will read some of the chapters with them out loud because, like the book was saying, I'm the best reader in the room. And so it's good for me to model that reading for them. We do jigsaw some. A lot of that is with like artifacts though, like newspaper clippings or journal entries or things like that they'll read, and they'll talk with the rest of their groups. We can probably start doing that with the textbook also, I think, and I think that would help out with some of the reading stuff they do. And it really hit home too when it talked about there's a quote in there that social studies and science are getting less and less attention, and it's because so much focus is on math and reading right now, that because of the state tests and the funding and things like that. So the social studies though, kids get pulled out of it. That's the first class that the kids get pulled out of if they have to do reading intervention. Science, my coworkers, anytime that there's something like it gets put into the science room, that science has to deal with it, and it takes away from their curriculum. Because every kid is in science, unlike social studies, so every kid can get the information from that, so it takes away from a lot of her classes, the other science teachers. And like the book was saying, you need these subjects for background knowledge. Plus, wasn't it just a few years back that they were talking about how we needed more people in the STEM industries, and science is part of that. So I don't understand why we're taking away from science now just for testing purposes. Basically, that doesn't make any sense to me either. One thing that I learned while reading was to allow more reading for choice. There's a lot of good books out there. If they're allowed to read for choice, they can get into their flow, and they can get to that point where they're trying to, they have to come up for air, as the author said, because they're so into the book. And this allows them to make real-world connections. The book talked about how it was like you are imagining, or you're like doing walkthroughs of real-life situations and how you would handle them. And that made a lot of sense, and that was a really good point that they made. And just when you're in a book, you're in like a whole different world, viewing it in your mind, and that's just really good for you. And if we're stopping every couple pages to take notes or do something else, that's just really boring and it's hard. It's hard to get into the flow. You're reading, you're stopping, you're reading, you're stopping. It's just not very good. And then what was interesting is when we read about the intervention programs that haven't been shown to be very helpful. And part of that goes with the page paradox, where you're trying to help, but the help is actually making things even worse. It's going in a circle, basically. They're struggling, so you're going to do this and this and this, and then there's now struggling because other things were taken away for the new things, and this whole paradox is just like the reading intervention classes, where that the kids are getting pulled from social studies to be in reading for 2 hours out of the day. If a kid's already struggling reading, they don't want to be in a basic reading class where they're learning reading strategies and theme and things like that, and they're not actually just reading books for 2 hours out of the day every day, when their friends get to be in PE and social studies and all these other classes, home ec, facts and stuff like that, ICT, CTE, and instead they're in a reading class for 2 hours. And then also, I had never heard of the Texas Miracle. I was in middle school in 2001 with the No Child Left Behind, and then freshman and sophomore in high school, and I was not paying attention to No Child Left Behind. I wasn't paying attention to really anything at the time if it wasn't sports related. So that was something that I had never heard of. I'd never even heard the concept about it, which is surprising to me that I made it this far in the education field and classes and never have heard about that. But it did. It was enlightening, to say the least, and it's just kind of sad that that's what we based the education for a long time in our country off of, lying about numbers, basically. So that was pretty insightful and something I had never heard about before. Another new thing that they talked about was the 50-50, reading academic and reading for choice. And I feel like that's something that I have never heard of. And it did make sense, because reading for choice, you're actually becoming a better reader by reading instead of by stopping every 2 pages to talk about what you read. You're figuring out what you read on your own. You're incorporating the strategies that all good readers have. And then just finding the sweet spot. I really liked that point when he's talking about finding a sweet spot as a teacher, the spot where the kids are learning and they're engaged. And that's something that I want to try to do more. What I'm planning on doing next year then from this reading is to get more interesting reading materials. I have a bunch of books in my room, but honestly most of them were just like left there. Or they were old social studies curriculum, so they're reading books, they're chapter books, they're novels. But they're all social studies based, and I haven't even read them, so I can't tell the kids that they're good or talk to them about them. And that's another thing that I want to be able to do more, is actually read myself more, so I can tell the kids about the books. Like the author was talking about a book that he was trying to get the kids in his class to read, and they wouldn't. So he started reading the book to them. And then he checked out the book and just gave it to a couple of the kids and was like, "Here, read it. We'll put everybody on a waiting list." And I think that was a really good way to get them to do it. The reason they weren't reading the book wasn't because they didn't think it was interesting, but they would have to go down to the library and check it out and then bring it back and all these other things. And he made it easier for them by just taking it there. So I think getting more reading selection and actually reading the book so I can promote the books to them would be a good idea. Even if it's just once a week, talk to them about a book and let them know, because it's important for me to model that reading is important, and right now I don't think I do that. So I think that's something that I can work on. It's just hard to find time to read right now. I'll graduate this December, so I'll be done with my master's classes, so that will free up a whole lot of time, hopefully, that I can use for other things. And then, and then I have a 17-month-old daughter, I coach, and I work besides teaching. So, but those are just excuses. There's always ways to make time to read. I make time to do other things that I like to do. So that's one thing that I need to work on. I really liked the idea of the one pagers, where they just have one list of one page, have the kids work on it and use that as the assessment and to reading checks to make sure they're doing it. They're easy, they don't take long, and it's enough that that the kids are keeping up reading. I liked the idea of introducing the reading strategies to them, just like we talked about giving speeches and speaking and listening, and how we don't teach the kids how to give a speech, good ways to communicate or things like that. And just like with reading, I've never one time thought about, hey kids, this is a good strategy for reading. I have mentioned, like, if you read around the word, you can figure it out, but that's just one of many reading strategies that would help these kids, not only in social studies, but in their lives. So I think that's something that I also want to include more of. And then my favorite thing, and we used to watch CNN 10, but it just became too time consuming almost, because I have my curriculum that I have to keep up with, and it was making me fall behind, having 10 minutes of watching the news every day, which I find highly valuable for the kids, especially in social studies. But in life, a lot of it's the only time they're watching anything on the news, so they don't have any idea what's going on around them if they don't. And I think I'm gonna try to make room for that again. And then, but I really liked they talked about having Newsweek. I think Newsweek is a little bit above the reading level of a lot of my 8th graders, but we have Junior Scholastic, and that has, it's kind of the same principle there. And I think that if I could get a class set of that and have my kids read that, just once a week or something like that, just to keep up with what's happening in the world around them, and it'll be easier to make connections with what we're teaching in U.S. history if they have modern day connections, which right now, if it's not about Fortnite, a lot of them don't have any idea what you're talking about. So that's something that I really look forward to doing. But overall, I really did like this book. It was a fast read. It was very insightful, knowledgeable, it made a lot of sense. And I think that I can become a better teacher because of reading it. So I hope everybody else who read the book enjoyed it. And sorry that my video is 18 minutes long, but thanks for watching it if you took the time to do it, and have a good night. See ya.